This is a production of PBS Charlotte.
This week on Off the Record, what Charlotte's police chief thinks about locking up illegal immigrants and how that could affect the race for Mecklenburg sheriff. Also, Republicans running for Congress fighting over who's for Trump, who's against Trump, who's endorsed by Trump. City Council takes a new look at Charlotte's old Eastland Mall site and a possible mall makeover. And all aboard plans for train service between Charlotte and Lake Norman. Okay, well, maybe not all aboard. Anyway, Off the Record is next on PBS Charlotte. Hi, I'm Jeff Sonnier. This is Off the Record, where we talk about the stories you've been talking about this week. And if you watch the news, read the news, or listen to the news, you'll recognize the names and faces around our table. Jim Worrell from the Charlotte Observer and Mark Becker from WSOC-TV. Thanks for joining us. Also, David Borax from WFAE and Kirsten Garris from Spectrum News. Thank you all for being here this week. Let's talk first about immigration, shall we? The program is called 289G. And in effect, what it says is that if you're arrested for any offense in Mecklenburg County, brought through the county jail, then your immigration status will be checked at some point, and in some cases, you could be held at the request of federal immigration officers. It's not often that law enforcement in town disagrees on an issue like this. It's certainly not often when they disagree publicly. Mark, tell us a little bit about that.
Well, the history, of course, goes back about 10 years or so. Jim Pendergraph was the sheriff at the time, and he created this program, and really it was a national thing as well. The discussion about immigration was there. And what are we going to do if we have people who are here without proper documentation, and we kind of danced around that word illegally, right? And they're arrested. Why are they then released? Well, the issue, I think, as Chief Putney sees it, is are you going to essentially fulfill a function that is fulfilled by the immigration officers, and are his police officers going to be perceived, and this is the critical issue, on the street by people in that community as friend or foe? They want people to call police when they need help. If there's a chilling effect, and if they're afraid to call police because they're afraid they might end up coming out from under the radar, that's a problem, because there are a lot of people in that community who have been targeted as victims of crime. And it really gets to the heart of the issue of, protect and serve, which is what the police want to do. And Chief Putney isn't the first one to have drawn that line. I think Chief Monroe, when he was here, had the same sort of feeling. Look, we're not going to be immigration officers. And if that is the perception, that's a problem.
Yeah, and I know Chief Putney made those comments in reference to if this program is for locking up violent criminals, it is a good tool. But again, for regular folks on the street, it does instill the sense of fear, because those who are immigrants in our community, they may not know the distinction of sheriff's deputy versus police officer. It's just all police. And recently, after Trump's election, we saw a lot of immigrants kind of come to the surface and say, hey, we're scared of this law. This law is not really working in our community. And that's why we've heard more people talk about it. And it is become an issue in this sheriff's election, because you have 3 Democrats running for election, the incumbent Sheriff Erwin Carmichael, who supports the program, but then his 2 challengers, they are very much against it for that same reason. They believe it makes it harder for police to do their job.
So is this an example of the police chief tiptoeing into the sheriff's race and perhaps influencing, if not the race itself, certainly the perception of that particular issue? As you mentioned, 2 of the candidates are former Charlotte police officers. 2 of those candidates say they do not support the 289G program. It kind of sets up you're on my side or you're on my side issue. And could that possibly affect the election? Or is this an example of maybe the chief getting involved in an election either inadvertently or purposefully?
I think the chief elevates the profile of the issue even more. I mean, it's already been an issue, as she said, in the sheriff's race, where you have the 2 opponents to Sheriff Carmichael, both opposing the program. What's interesting to me is that this has been around, like you said, Mark, for 12 years in Mecklenburg County, and I don't remember it being an issue in previous sheriff's races.
So a 287G, it's called 287G, is an issue that has the city and county squeezed in 2 directions. I mean, we've talked about how the immigrant community here is concerned about it and how that affects policing in town. The county is also being squeezed from above, where the feds are really cracking down right now on communities that are perceived to be sanctuary cities. And so they're saying, if you don't do this work for us, then we may come after you. And there's examples already around the country where the government has gone after them and threatened to take away federal funding for it. So they're squeezed in two ways.
Yeah, we're not the only county that recognizes the 287G program. There's 4 others in North Carolina. There's 59 communities around the country that do this. So no one's reinventing the wheel here. I guess the question is, why this year in this election versus other years? Maybe it's just because of the overall raised profile of the immigration issue nationwide.
I don't know that Chief Putney hasn't spoken out about this
I think
before.
he has, actually.
But now, in the lens of this sheriff's race, and let's be honest, we haven't had really competitive sheriff's races here for a long time. We had a sheriff named C.W. Kidd here forever, and then we had Jim Pendergraft, who was here for many years, and incumbency just kept them coming back. Well, now it's a little different, right? And that the national discussion has spilled over into the local discussion. So there's a lot more at stake.
And I think the primary here, too, is the election. There's no Republican running, so
Right.
whichever one of these 3 Democrats wins the sheriff's race is going to be the sheriff. So there's a lot riding on this primary.
Is this issue enough to sway a race? I know that, is this enough to bring out, for example, the Latino community as a voting bloc, or to influence other voting blocs to cast a vote for Sheriff Carmichael or against Sheriff Carmichael?
I think
it
so.
is. Yeah, I think it is, because we've seen the Latino community actually hold more events, and they're holding these events. They had a sheriff's forum a couple of weeks ago at Manolo's Bakery, a place where people come and gather regularly. So they're trying to meet people where they are and host these forums. They're not just doing the sheriff's race, they're doing county commission, they're doing state house. So you see the Hispanic community really getting engaged this year. And it's worth noting that in 2014, when Sheriff Carmichael was first elected, there were only about 19,000 registered Hispanic voters in Mecklenburg County. Now it's nearly 30,000. So if all 30,000 show up, which again, that's unlikely because not everyone shows up to a primary election, but think about it, if half of those show up, that's a lot of voters, and they could sway the election this year.
Well, but for all of them, there are going to be some on the other side who are strongly in favor of the 287G program, right? There are going to be those folks who will vote, come out, be motivated to vote probably for exactly the opposite.
And the sheriff has made, he's had presentations and press conferences talking about this as more or less a law and order issue versus a immigration issue, talking about the kinds of folks that have been kept in jail because of their screening through the 287G program. So both sides kind of gauging this as a potential issue. In a close 3-way race, it could perhaps be the race, or be the issue that sways that race or pushes one candidate above.
There's not
or
a lot of other issues in the sheriff's
Right,
race that sort
exactly.
of come to the fore, so this could be a decisive
There is the
issue.
gun issue.
The
There
gun
was
issue,
an
I was gonna say,
incident
right.
where the sheriff was having an auction or a raffle
raffle
for
for-
an
Yeah, the
AR-15,
fundraiser.
I think, and at this moment in time, it's really not a good thing, and he canceled it to his credit. So.
Yeah, and then the inmate video program. I know that's something that has gotten some conversation because, again, Carmichael is on one side of the aisle and his opposers, or his challengers, oppose the program and they believe it should be changed in some way. So we'll see. I mean, there are several issues, but 287G has clearly become the front runner issue in this election.
And just the fact that we're discussing the sheriff's race as the lead on our discussion tells you this is different this time, right?
Well, we're about a month from the election, and as long as we're on the topic, let's talk a little bit about the race for Congress, 9th District here in North Carolina, featuring, in particular, the Republican primary is interesting. Jim, you wrote this week about how it's getting a little bit nastier, the race between incumbent Congressman Robert Pittenger and Mark Harris, who almost defeated him in the primary 2 years ago and is back for another try, along with a third candidate, Clarence Goins from Cumberland County. Tell me about the Pittenger-Harris dynamic here.
Yeah, Harris is a former pastor of First Baptist Church in Charlotte, and he ran in the primary 2 years ago, like you said, and he lost by 134 votes. So there was every expectation that this would be another close race. It hasn't seemed as close until recently, or maybe not even recently, but there was a poll by Civitas, a conservative group, that showed a 30-point spread in Pittenger's favor. But the race has always been a little bit nasty under the surface. And this week, Dr. Harris has come out with new television ads that accuse Pittenger of being allergic to the truth and lying. And in some ways, they sort of mimic Pittenger's ads against Harris, but Pittenger has been on the air longer. So, there's no love lost on either side. And in the meantime, you have a Democrat, Dan McCready, who's the probable Democratic nominee, who's husbanding away money. And, you know, he's sitting on almost $1 million already.
That's never going to happen. I mean, I hate to say it, but the way the district is drawn, let's just be honest, it would take something of a political miracle for Dan McCready to win. But that's down the road. We're talking about Harris and Pittenger. And
Remember, the last race was the first one with the new district, so that may have had something to do with the closeness of the race.
Pittenger was an incumbent, but he didn't feel like an incumbent to a lot of the voters who were going to the
rest of
polls for him
Mecklenburg
for the
County
first
to
time.
now representing a small piece of it and the counties to the east. So his name recognition was not as high, but now he's got the power of incumbency in this time around.
What's interesting to me is how both candidates are running toward the president in this case, at least in their advertising. In a lot of other races around the country, we've seen Republicans in particular split on, pro-Trump versus anti-Trump Republicans. Here, they're fighting over who's really endorsed by the White House, who's the real supporter back in the days when he was running for president. Are there no Republicans on the other side that would look at a pro-Trump endorsement or a pro-Trump support during the presidential election as a negative?
apparently not. I mean, I think in this case, the race and the tactics are defined by who's involved, and everybody's trying to stake the claim to being the farthest to the right, the most conservative. And if you had a centrist candidate coming in, they may step in and say, well, I'm not really going to associate myself with President Trump. I'm going to try to woo the people in the middle. Guess what? There are no people in the middle, right? Everybody's one side or the other. That's another discussion. But yeah, it's how far right can you go?
It's going to be interesting after the primary, because typically after primaries, people move to the center. And both of these guys, whoever wins, are so staked out in the president's corner that I think it'd be hard for either one of them to move to the center after the primary is over.
Yeah, and it's to me an interesting strategy only because the president, while he's the president, he's not the most popular president in polls or even among his own party members, and yet here's a race where there are no Republicans who are anti-Trump Republicans, at least not among the top two contenders in this particular.
Well, you got to remember who votes in a Republican primary,
right,
or a Democratic primary is the most ardent people on either side, the most passionate people who are. Partisans in both parties vote in the primaries, and that's who they're appealing to.
Well, we can talk more about the election as it gets closer. Let's switch gears and talk a little bit about an issue that's been around for so long that talking about it it seems like the summer reruns are upon us. Eastland Mall is what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. If you've been out there recently, there is no mall anymore. We refer to it as the mall, but it's a large demolition site, essentially, except for one tiny corner where they're building a new CMS school. Correct. And now we've got 4 new developers and 4 new plans, and a lot of skepticism, frankly, on the part of East Siders in particular, who have seen plans come and go and seen not much change over the years when it comes to the site itself. Kirsten?
That's correct. A lot of East Siders are feeling like, we've heard this all before. What's different this time around? But at least now we have some plans. After many failed attempts to redevelop Eastland Mall, we have 4 somewhat concrete plans. On Tuesday, Monday, we heard from 4 developers. 3 of them are plans that would basically redevelop the entire remaining 69 acres that are out there on Eastland Mall into some kind of mixed-use entertainment, arts, humanities, sports complex situation. One of them was more hyper-focused into a smaller family entertainment center. But, we're seeing this sense of trying to build in the community. A lot of people talked about demographics of the community, whether it was the Hispanic community or even just the international culture of East Charlotte. So you saw that these developers really tried to tap into what is East Charlotte. They even talked about some of them had an ice skating rink in their plans. So you saw people really trying to pay homage to exactly, kind of going back to the future here. But again, people are trying to capture that same sense of what Eastland meant. Because, we still call it Eastland Mall, even though clearly it's just dirt and concrete, but people were really trying to capture that sense of what did Eastland mean to East Charlotte? How can we bring that back, but also bring people to the area? That's the whole point. How do you make it an economic driver? And
I think the problem there is that Eastland Mall has obviously changed, but so has the east side of Charlotte. A lot of folks who might connect with things like the old skating rink, they're not East Siders anymore. The whole east side has really changed demographically, and I guess that's complicating for anybody who's trying to come up with a game plan to make that place and that side of town viable again.
That changing demographics, I think, is one of the things that contributed to the closing of the mall in 2010 and why we have a vacant lot there right now. But I do think it sounds like some of these developers are trying to invoke some of the feeling of the past. They all include some kind of entertainment. There's an indoor soccer complex, which sounds interesting to me. And I think all of those are trying to appeal to that. There's also, in a couple of the plans anyway, there's apartments which supposedly are aimed at millennials. And it's another thing we've heard so many times in Charlotte. Isn't there something for the rest of us? One of the plans.
No breweries out there?
Yeah, so one of the plans,
They're working on
Brewery, you're
it.
good. Yeah.
and one of the plans explicitly mentions affordable housing as well, which is something the city has been pushing. So it'll be interesting to see how the council reacts to these plans. There will be a recommendation at some point, I think. They seem confident that there's something within this group that they can move forward with.
In some way, it's a test to this new council, too. We've got a lot of new members, and we've got a lot of new young members, and they've got basically a blank canvas out there. They own the property. They have control over how that property is developed. How do you see this as maybe a litmus test for the new council members and whether they, as a team or individually, can make something happen, with a new focus and maybe fresh eyes as opposed to the tried and true council members that they replaced who were never able to do much out there?
I think so. I mean, that's what a lot of the newer council members kind of ran on, was a sense of we're a fresh voice, a fresh perspective. And I know even Dimple Ajmir, who was appointed last year for East Charlotte, she ran for at-large, but she's still very active in trying to figure out how can they move forward with East Charlotte. Matt Newton, who is the district representative, he spent a lot of time working with the community. And when I talk with Eastsiders, they mentioned those two names specifically, saying, okay, these are the folks we've talked to, these are the folks who've been in the trenches, and we expect them to give us some results. And you heard Representative Newton say, okay, we want to make sure the community's involved. So they talked about a recommendation maybe by April 26th, but Newton said, hey, maybe that should be flexible, because when we're not ready, let's not rush this thing. Let's make a project that's right, one that will last for years, so we're not here 10, 15 years later saying, what do we do with Eastland?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I think from a developer, and I'm not a developer, Lord knows, but from a developer's point of view, I would think it's pretty attractive, right? I mean, you've got this space of land out there. You've got Independence Boulevard, which is almost a freeway, kind of, sort of, and then Albemarle shooting off. Traffic could be a bit of a problem, but you've got some real potential there if you've got the right mix of housing, I think you have to have a large housing component, and maybe a few attractions out there. But the Birkdale Village kind of create its own sort of a synergy right there, so folks living there don't have to go somewhere else to do their shopping. I think 10 years from now we'll look back and say, why didn't that happen sooner? Because I think there's real potential as Charlotte continues to grow. That's a big blank spot that they can fill in with some maybe not entirely high-end stuff, some affordable housing. The city, I think, will absolutely do that. But a nice mixed-use place. I really think 10 years will say, but that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It'll take time. Regardless of what plan they choose, nothing's going to be there until like 2021, 2022. So we're still very far down the line before we see Eastland transform into anything else.
And despite the talk about hotels and about soccer practice facilities and film studios and all this thing, we haven't heard one word from any developer about how much A, this will cost, or B, they will be asking taxpayers to kick in. So that's another part of this discussion that can easily change the whole dynamic of what council will or won't support. It's more like what can council afford or not afford at that point.
Maybe the streetcar will change all that when it goes out there.
Boy,
Whenever.
we're going to have to be coming back to this table for a long time to get to that point, I suppose. But anyway, speaking of streetcars, we had a big decision this week regarding light rail, not on the east side of town, but north of Charlotte. The Red Line, which ultimately on the maps would take commuters from uptown to Huntersville, Cornelius, Davidson, and on to Mooresville. It's interesting to me that some of the very folks that you would think would benefit most by this service are the ones who aren't so sure in its current form they want the service. David, talk about that. You're plugged in with those folks.
So there was a meeting Wednesday night with the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, and there was a motion on the table by one member, John Annarella. He's the mayor of Huntersville, and he wanted to cancel a study that's underway right now to look at alternates to the current alignment for the route. Right now, CATS would like to put this on it's called the O-line. It's operated by Norfolk Southern. It's a little used, if used at all, old freight line. CATS wants to use that, but Norfolk Southern has so far said you can't use our tracks. So in a desperation move, I think they said, well, let's look at if there's any other alternatives. And so a consulting firm is looking at that right now. The vote last night was whether to cancel that study, and John Annarella ended up being all by himself there with no votes to support him on that. 7-1 was the final vote. I do think that there was a consensus in the room last night, though, that they really do want, actually, if there's a way to make it work on the existing rail line, that's what most people would like to see. The towns along the line, and Annarella made this point, Huntersville and Cornelius and Davidson have been developing their downtown areas around the presence of this line. So I think one of the things that came out of it was telling John Lewis, the head of CATS, get to work negotiating with Norfolk Southern and see if there's not a way to work this out.
The danger of drawing a line on a map for the future, a lot of people take that as gospel or at least something they can plan around, and now faced with the prospect of that line moving somewhere else, I mean, all the folks who have, as you mentioned, developed shopping centers and housing over the years now find themselves wondering what is going to be the future of this.
And not to mention the cost of a new line. You'd have to buy right away. You'd have to go to a
Billions
lot
of
more
dollars.
expense. Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot more expense than if you were able to piggyback on existing tracks. And maybe there'll be more pressure on Norfolk Southern now with the tollway almost done. That's not a very popular thing, to say the least, among people in North Mecklenburg County. So who knows?
If I'm living up there, I
Right.
don't live up there,
Right.
but if I'm living up there, I say, let's try everything we can to make the commute easier, better, give us some options. I may never take the train, but let's put it out there. So yeah, and probably this is what happened in that meeting where the mayor of Huntersville thought he had a bunch of support maybe to stop this thing, and people said, well, let's just give it, let's not say we killed it,
Yeah, and I think his concern is if you change where the line goes,
Right.
I don't think that he necessarily opposes having train service to the north end.
Right.
What he opposes is having train service that will, A, cost a lot more, B, abandon all those land plans that they've had over the years in favor of new land plans, which will tie up that property for God knows how long, and C, not having the financial, asking for more money. I mean, if you live in the north end, you've been paying the transit tax just like everybody else in Mecklenburg County since it's existed in the 90s. And what do you have to show for that so far? I mean, they watch new lines opening to UNCC and down to Pineville and talk of the airport and the streetcar. And if you're a taxpayer that lives, north of, anywhere near Lake Norman, you've got to, just say, where's our payback? Where's our part of the deal here? So.
And that's kind of exactly what Mayor Annarella is saying. And he's actually been fighting this fight since last year. And so last year he brought this to the board and said the same thing. He believes there's no viable line except the old line. And that's why he said if we're going to spend money on something, it should be on immediate transportation needs, things like improving bus stations, bus shelters, things like that. He said if we're going to spend $2+ million, let's use it on things that can help people now versus a study that he believes, again, may not bring any viable options. So it's worth noting that this was a more than a year-long fight for him. And I think with new leadership coming in Davidson and Cornelius, he thought, okay, let's bring this discussion back around one more time. And we even mentioned before the show started that a month ago he felt like he had support from the surrounding towns, but then Wednesday night he was the lone man there.
Another interesting thing that came out last night, CATS talked an awful lot about what they've learned in the study so far, and one of the themes that's emerging from some of the surveys is that people actually want more than a commuter train. So we learned that the commuter train would run on weekdays at peak hours, probably with not much service during the daytime, probably not on the weekends. I think what many people up in North Mecklenburg, and that's where I live, are thinking about is we want something that's more like a light rail or at least a more frequent commuter service that would allow us to come into town at off hours for entertainment and that sort of thing.
Dumb question. You got the train, you got the tracks. Why wouldn't it run on weekends?
I think it would. They were thinking about how many riders would there be on weekends, and they're not. I don't think that, the discussion about a commuter train now goes back like 7-8 years. North Mecklenburg has been growing like crazy, and you got people coming from lots of places, and they're thinking about this as being close to Charlotte, and they want to be able to get there.
And they want to stay off I-77.
Exactly.
And especially now during the construction, but after the tolls too.
You talked about new leadership. One of the reasons you have new leadership in the North End is because of the controversy regarding the toll lanes. So it makes you wonder at what point will these kinds of issues, toll lanes versus regular expansion of 77, the transit taxes that are spent on projects everywhere else but in North End, at what point will this become the issue in North Mecklenburg that maybe drives who wins elections and has influence on county-wide elections, as it may have had, for example, in the governor's race when supposed supporters of Governor McCrory might have voted a different way because of this one issue.
Well, Governor McCrory lost by about 10,000 votes, and there were easily more than that switched Republican voters, presumably, who switched against him in North Mecklenburg. So it did have an effect already.
Bringing the two together, I attended, there were a couple of official ribbon cuttings for the new extension of the light rail. Every politician in Charlotte over the last 40 years, minus at least one, were there at some point. I'd wonder how many will be there for the ribbon cutting of the new toll lanes. My guess is not quite
One
so.
other
Wait and
political
see.
issue here is that the idea of toll lanes and the idea of train, the people who are opposed to those things are not necessarily the same people. In the social media groups that are fighting the toll lanes on 77, there's actually a divide among those folks. It's like they agree not to talk too much about trains because there are anti-toll people who support the idea of a train and vice versa.
Oh, boy.
We got about a minute left. Just want to talk really quickly about the Panthers. We had a visit this week, according to the Observer, from one of the potential buyers. We don't know much about him. He's a Canadian businessman. And any update at all about where we are in that process?
Well, I think that you're right. He came down to look, and I think it's getting warming up a little bit. I think the owners are meeting in May.
End of May, yeah.
End of May, and they're going to make a decision, presumably. And so something's got to happen before that.
And Jerry Richardson's decision will have to come before that. So my understanding is sometime at the end of this month or before, he will determine which of these prospective owners is the one that he wants to do business with before the NFL does business. So we could have an answer really quickly.
And I just got to thinking about this the other day when I saw again he's from Canada. NFL footprint, there's no discussion. I don't want to suggest that the Panthers are going to leave, but the Toronto, you just wonder if the NFL would be thinking of.
You never know. We just know one thing is going to cost a lot of money. That's for sure.
Everything costs a lot of money. That's a topic we'll talk about in the future as well. But we're out of time right now. Thanks again to our guests for being here this week. Thank you for being here this week. We'll see you the next time on Off the Record.
A production of PBS Charlotte.